Now that we've covered the key basics about OpenMRS 3 and what it is at a high level, we're now going to dive into some of the technical, developer-facing terms that developers using or building with OpenMRS 3 need to know and have some familiarity with. Keep in mind, though, that during this section of the course, we will cover a lot, but you might find it helpful if you're getting confused to jump ahead to the practical sessions that are coming up next and come back to this material if you need to reference it. Either approach is fine.
So what is OpenMRS 3, 3.x, or O3? It's a framework that leverages modern front-end technologies to enable us to collaboratively create better experiences faster. We had a couple guiding principles in choosing how to architect O3. This was a very long community process. First of all, we wanted to avoid duplicated effort and emphasize code reuse. So you'll see we're trying to invest strongly in reusable components, APIs, and templates. In fact, one of your homeworks today is going to be to use one of our templates so that you're more prepared for the lesson tomorrow. Modular architecture. This allows for easier addition, removal, updating of modules. We also really stress being configuration first. We talked a bit about the dictionary and the example of having malaria metadata as an example. But we take that even further with O3, where the vast majority of what you see in O3 actually has JSON configuration driving which data elements you are seeing. Usability, we have really tried to optimize the user interface. A significant amount of investment has gone into both time and frankly financing has gone into the user interface research and setting up those patterns. Enhanced user interface, we've tried to make the user interface more intuitive and also visually appealing. And then finally, improved interoperability, there's the optional use of the Fire API. It doesn't change the front end whether you use the Fire API or the REST API to query the backend, but we do generally encourage the use of Fire. Okay, our tech stack. What should you expect to be working with when you're working with O3? Primarily React, but also always TypeScript. TypeScript is kind of comes hand in hand with how we're using React, just because of the type safety that it brings with it. Carbon design system, we covered that a bit last week in the Fundamentals Academy. We'll look at that again together tomorrow. Webpack to help with our asset bundling in the browser. Yarn, we use that as our package manager. GitHub Actions, Turbo Repo, and Lerna, primarily GitHub Actions. Single SPA is the name of the project we use that creates these microservices for the front end, micro front ends. So you'll a little bit more on that in a minute. And then of course the OpenMRS REST and Fire APIs. Tooling in O3. We have a tool called OpenMRS, which has a one-stop CLI. SWC, this has been a really important tool for us for code transpilation. It's been especially helpful for quickly updating after a user takes an action on the React front end. Webpack has been a key bundler for us and is where we managed to make some performance improvements in the last year. Husky ESLint is our code linter. We use a lot of the React testing library, Playwright and Jest. If you haven't heard of Playwright, you can think like Selenium and then Cypress and then Playwright in that kind of order. So similar to Cypress, we ended up switching from Selenium to Cypress and then from Cypress to Playwright over the last couple of years because we found that Playwright had a better documented community as well as a lot of support you can find online about how to write your front-end tests with Playwright. And it also has, drumroll, offline test support, which Cypress did not have. And it was unclear on their roadmap when that would be coming out. Turbo Repo, prettier for code formatting. TSC, your TypeScript compiler. And of course, for our CI and CD, we use GitHub Actions and an older tool called Bamboo from Atlassian. Structure of the code base. One of the common questions we get from people is, where's the repo? Where is the code? And this slide, again, I'll share the links, but this slide will help you find those different repositories. However, I want to show you, do you remember earlier I said, please bookmark one of those links? Well, here is that one of those links, the dev docs. And you can see that one of the very first pages is the key repositories. Here you can see a link to all of the key repositories. So for example, for home patient chart, these are all pretty key. I'm going to open one example, patient chart. All right, so let's just go straight to GitHub. Earlier, we talked about the attachments front end. So the attachment front end lives in a mono repo, kind of like a parent repo, for everything involving the patient chart. So if I was working on an allergy feature or attachments or maybe past visit notes, that would be under the patient chart mono repo. Specifically, we're going to go into packages, and it's here that you can see all of these ESMs, all of these mini apps that compose the patient chart in O3. But what about things that are more high level, like a clinic dashboard or maybe a calendar view for a clerk who needs to do appointment management? Well, that would be a level higher up in the patient management mono repo. Let's go ahead and have a look at that one. In the patient management mono repo, that's where we have some of these applications that stretch beyond just one patient. So for example, registration exists in the patient management mono repo, patient searching in the patient management mono repo. Those are just a few key repos to know, but you're going to want to spend some time just exploring them. The form builder GUI, which we demonstrated the other day in the fundamentals last week, that has its own repo as well. I think those are some of the key ones to know. So often we get asked, well, how does this all come together? What does the diagram look like of O3? And there are four major constituent parts to know. There's the app shell, which helps you load front-end modules. There's the core framework, and there's the import map and the front-end modules themselves. So the examples we were just looking at, like attachments. Attachments is an example of a front-end module, or the allergies widget is an example of a front-end module. These are like micro mini modules. Just in the same way as earlier, when we were looking at this example, this would be an ESM, this would be an ESM, this would be an ESM. All right, back to this one. Those were front-end modules. So the app shell does a lot of stuff for us. It loads in what modules you want, your import map, and your configuration files that are going to specify how you're using and configuring the front-end modules. So things to know about front-end modules, like the ones we just talked about, they are the basic building blocks of OpenMRS 3. They're organized into those big mono repos that we looked at just now, based on their domain. So patient management handles patient management concerns like appointment scheduling, patient registration, queuing. Front-end modules bring with them domain-specific UI capabilities. They get loaded into the app indirectly, actually, using a special JSON file called the import map. You'll remember in the previous diagram, the import map is specifying which front-end modules you want. So for example, let's say for some reason you decided, well, I don't like the community's lab results viewer, so I'm going to build my own. You would then specify in your import map to use Grace's custom module instead of the community one. Using a predefined set of functionality, we use a special startup function that basically when you start up your application, it pulls in all of those mini apps that you've predefined. And the front-end modules in O3, as you've already heard me doing, are often referred to as micro front-ends or ESMs, ECMAScript modules. All right, let's look at the actual anatomy. What does the JSON file look like for one of these front-end modules, one of these ESMs? Well, we're looking at one of the things we're going to get you to work with over the next day until we meet again tomorrow. And that's the ESM template app. We've actually created for you a template micro front-end application that you can use to start from if you're building your own new application. And this is a good one to play with as you're learning. The root level package.json is defining your dependencies and any metadata that comes just with that micro front-end module. Question in the chat is the import map also JSON based? Yes, correct. The name of the module always ends with the app suffix. The browser entry is the entry point into the Webpack bundle. We are really trying to leverage browser-based tooling as much as we can. Source.index.ts, you can explore in the template app a bit more. So this one is a seed app. That's usually most developers' first introduction to O3. Let's go on in. So when you're in the template app, you'll find that most of the components also have annotations. Please have a look through those annotations because we've tried to set up the comments as a way to guide you in being familiar on how you're going to work with such an application. So people have used this template app both to onboard themselves to OpenMRS 3 and get more comfortable with it. You can also use it in the future when you want a starting point for a custom application for your team. For example, when we go into the source code, you'll be able to explore some of these different files like the index file, which we are now talking about here. So your app entry point, this is communicating about where is the app shell? What's in it? What's your configuration? What's your translation or internationalization setup? Let's say it's really important to you to have anything from a French to Portuguese to Swahili translations. This is where you start to specify that level of information. And it also includes which React components you're pulling in and how to load them, and as well as a couple other optional things that you can set up there. The startup app is performing any setup that should happen at your load time, as well as adding some rendering descriptions. But each of your front-end modules need some kind of startup app function, or they may not load. Roots.json. This is specifying each of your front-end modules' static metadata. So here you can see, for example, it's naming different extensions, red box, blue box. The app shell is explained here. It's evaluating style sheets and scripts, configuring your SPA application, the single page application.
Single SPA is a JavaScript library for doing microservices in the browser. Picture your single page application. It's written with an old framework and it keeps getting larger. Your team is stepping on each other's toes and deployments are getting harder and harder. You want to use a newer framework, but the impending rewrite dominates your shower thoughts. Now imagine converting your app into microservices. You split things into self-contained applications. Your team builds and deploys the application separately. That new JavaScript framework you've always wanted to use it. And don't worry, you can change it later if you want to. You'll never have to rewrite the entire project just to use the latest and greatest. Enter Single SPA applications. An application is a group of UI components registered to Single SPA that controls part of the web page. These applications coexist no matter what framework they're written in. You might be wondering how all of this works. Once your code is registered as a Single SPA application, the key is a common API made of 3 parts. A bootstrap function for initialization, a mount function that activates the application, and an unmount function that deactivates the application. Your code bootstraps, mounts, and unmounts, then Single SPA does the rest. The Single SPA JavaScript library hooks into your client-side routing so that at any time the correct applications are active. This might sound really hard to set up, but it's actually not. Your code doesn't need to change. You can just wrap it with some helper libraries.
Much of that is covered with more specific detail in the dev onboarding guide. Some of the questions that were raised in the expectations for the day were around configuring. And you'll see there's a lot of intro to configuring. The simplest thing I would encourage folks to start trying tomorrow, because it's really fun, is changing your own branding on your own local instance. We've got some example config that you can work with here to try changing your logo, even your colors in the application. So for example, we've had different folks change the coloring of the major user interface components to reflect whatever branding their organization is using. Core framework. Okay. One of the, you might have noticed if you were paying really close attention, I skipped over one of our most important key repositories, which is core. Let's have a quick look at core together here. Most of the time, you'll be working with either the patient chart or patient management monorepo, but core is something that we all share no matter what. It looks like a broken link there. All right, here is ESM core. So core contains a whole bunch, this monorepo contains a whole bunch of stuff that impacts the framework, dev tooling, as well as a few shared apps. For example, we have some, the login app is a good example of a shared app across everything. And interestingly, our implementer tools app. Let me quickly show you that in case you haven't seen it already. Let's go to the demo site, o3.openmrs.org. All right, we're in French, so I'm just going to change to my test site, test3. This is our testing environment, and I know there are some people testing in French right now, which is why I'm switching over to English. If you did need to change your locale, it's just up here under the profile. Implementer tools. This is an example. We've tried to help people find the right configuration through these implementer tools. But let me show you something pretty cool. If I turn this UI editor on, and it's only admins that can see these tools, by the way, all of a sudden you can actually see the slots where apps can sit. Let me go to a patient chart, and suddenly, do you see that highlighting that becomes available when I turn on this UI editor here in the implementer tools? Suddenly we can see exactly which slots and apps are existing here. So for example, this patient header right here that says George, this is called the patient highlights bar slot. And in that slot, we have an application that is launching itself. This is one of the many applications. In the same way, this slot is called the patient chart summary dashboard slot. And you can see there are a couple of micro front ends that have added themselves in here. So the implementer tools are a good example of something you would find as a core application. Import maps. There was a question earlier about what is the import map encoded in JSON as well. Yes, it is. Let's have a look at this example. So here, for example, you can see that this import map is saying, I want my application to use all of these front ends. This is a good thing to know because sometimes we have people say, I really don't want to use this front end. Or I want to specify that I want to use the older version or the newest version. And this is where you would do that in your import map. So see if you can find the import map in GitHub for the reference application. I'll give you a hint. Here is where you can find the reference application and how we have specified our JSON files for the O3 demo that I was just clicking around in. So this is your homework for today, creating a front-end module. We want you to fork the template app that I shared the link to in the chat and use that as your starter seed. You'll get a lot of sensible defaults out of the box. Follow the instructions in the code and the README there to modify it. This is going to start introducing you to the extension system. If you were feeling confused when I started talking about slots, don't worry. This is going to become your bread and butter of working with O3. Do you remember when we were looking at that? Thank you so much for the time reminder, Joshua. Do you remember when we were looking at that video from Single SPA? We use Single SPA's parceling mechanism to define slots in the UI where others can plug into that slot. And if you want a deeper dive on extensions, that is also covered in the, I'll fix that. That is also covered in the developer onboarding. I believe it's down here, yeah, the extension system. So if you want to better understand extensions and slots, that is also covered here. I'm going to paste that in the chart, and I will ask our team to cover that in a bit more detail. All right, the configuration system. So we created a bit of UI that will help people explore with how much configuration they can do. And that's the implementer tools that we were just looking at together. There we go. Each front-end module can define its own configuration schema, and these configurations can be tweaked dynamically at runtime. So for example, let's tweak something in the, I want to go in here. Let's see if I can change one of these columns in the Vitals app. Let's find the Vitals. There it is. So here's the Vitals app. It exists within this slot in the patient chart, the summary slot here. And specifically, you can see that, remember when we talked about the dictionary and the concepts? You can see that we've got this blood pressure concept configured as this one. If I changed it and I really wanted to use a different particular code here, then I can make an edit in this UI to see how it would look. But I need to make sure that if I want that to persist, that I would update the relevant JSON file for it. We use two libraries when it comes to translation. We use international I18N and React I18N next, internationalization. Import translation. This promise tells the app shell where to find translation keys and strings. We use a tool as a community called Transifex that helps translators or people who speak multiple language and are volunteering as translators to basically quickly add a translation. And then our application basically sucks that work in to say, okay, someone provided us a translation in Transifex, such as the translation for this login screen. And then we'll pull in that translation from Trans. These are the other important links and resources you should have access to. Some people mentioned Zeppelin. This is a good link to follow to get started. Some release cadence and CI/CD pieces covered here, as well as links to the different support areas we mentioned earlier.
If you made it to this part of the course, congratulations! This was probably the driest part of the course. Stay tuned for the next sessions, which are focused on the practical application with some of our community developers explaining things live time.